we both came from Nazareth. I mean, like, this is like, can anything good come out of Nazareth? You know, it's like, we're from South Dakota, for heaven's sake. It's like, how did this happen that one university has produced two global ministries on opposite coasts?
Hey, alumni. Welcome to InterVarsity World Changers, the podcast celebrating God's world-changing work in and through InterVarsity alumni like you. I'm your host, John Steele, and today we're talking with two guests, Roy Tinklenberg and Mac Pier. Roy and Mac are longtime friends and chapter members from the University of South Dakota, and they are also Urbana alumni, having gone to Urbana 79 together, where their lives were changed forever by God through speakers like John Stott, Elizabeth Elliot, and Billy Graham. And these two have been changing the world with Jesus through organizations like Movement.org and the Faith and Work Movement, where they are mobilizing and encouraging leaders to carry out highly contextualized ministry in cities and workplaces around the world. I loved getting to chat with these guys, and I'm excited for you to get to hear their stories. Thanks for tuning in, and enjoy Roy and Mac's story. Mac and Roy, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure.
Yes, I am really looking forward to chatting with you today. I'm especially excited. First of all, it's very rare for me to get to talk to two people together on this podcast, so that's fun. And to know people that have history like the two of you do, a couple of buddies from the good old days on campus. I'm excited just to hear the ways that some of that flavors our conversation. But before we get into any of the details, would you do the audience a great service in helping us get to know you? Mac, I'll pass it to you first. Would you give us an introduction, and then Roy, introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Thanks, John. My name is Mac Pier. I'm a native, actually, of small town Avon, South Dakota.
Okay.
Did my university work at the University of South Dakota. That's where Roy and I met. My family's owned a bank for 110 years, so that's a bit of our background.
Okay.
And I was really influenced by InterVarsity as a student, and particularly the Urbana Missions Conference. After graduating university, I was on staff with InterVarsity for 13 years, 3 years Eastern South Dakota, 10 years in New York City, and have lived in New York the last 40 years, and currently lead an organization called Movement.org, which works with leaders in cities, about 500 cities around the world.
Okay. Wow. I would imagine a bit of a culture switch going from on staff in South Dakota, to being in the New York area.
Well, what helped was spending 10 weeks in North India. That was a good transition. So.
Okay. Nice. That's great. Super helpful. Roy, help us get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, I'm Roy Tinklenberg, also from the Midwest, born in Minnesota, raised in South Dakota, attended University of South Dakota, and that's where we got connected through InterVarsity. Mac and I were both a part of the student body for a little while, and then he was my staff worker. And so we got to do ministry together side by side. And then after school, I went to the other coast. So went to Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, started working in a Taiwanese American church called the Evangelical Formosan Church of San Fernando Valley. And then I moved to the Bay Area in 2001, started serving what was historically a Japanese American church, then crossed the Bay to the South Bay, the Silicon Valley part of the Bay, and served in a historically African American church in Mountain View. And in 2014, we started a church and a ministry that started reaching out to the workplace, which we now call Faith and Work Movement Global. And so it's been fun, and it has been global, starting with little companies that you may have heard of, like Google, Apple, Meta, and and
that
so
does sound familiar
just,
now that you mention them.
And because they have international offices through the conduit of the company, we were invited to several of their offices in the last couple of years. I've visited 25 cities and dropped into many of their offices and to encourage the believers in those places.
Wow. That's really cool, and I'm very excited to get to hear more about both of these organizations and some of the work that you're doing there. Hopefully, get to hear some cool stories. But first, you both have mentioned this already, and I'd like to lean into it just a little bit more. You two have known each other since campus days with InterVarsity. You've had different relationships as student, staff, student, some of those things together, and just good friends. Tell me, being an alumni podcast, I mean, we love to take a moment just to sort of go back and reminisce about some of those experiences. But can you tell me how it was that you came to meet InterVarsity in the first place? And do you have like a particular memory of meeting each other, how you came to know each other as students with InterVarsity together?
I started my freshman year in the fall of 1977. Okay. And I had really come to faith about a year before, just before my senior year in high school, and got involved with InterVarsity, began to attend a Bible study in the spring of my freshman year, attended Bible and Life, which was very formational for me those few years, and was on the executive leadership by the time I was a sophomore.
Nice.
Yeah, we were all thrown into the deep end of the pool back then. And
that happens.
And then so that was part of my journey. And then I was chapter president my junior year, which was the Urbana year from 1979. And we brought about 20 students from our chapter to Urbana that year. I know Roy was a part of that. And I know Roy was real active. He can fill in more of the detail, but I know we met in the life of the chapter, as it were, and had some shared experiences with things like Urbana. And Roy came on the executive committee pretty early on as well.
Yeah, I did. So I was the missions chairperson. So I kind of worked side by side to try to get people to go to Urbana in 79. And so we went together, and yeah, that was very formative for me, and I'm sure for Mac as well. Yeah. Went to the University of South Dakota in a kind of roundabout way. My brother went there, was part of InterVarsity. I knew his buddy who became the staff worker. And I went to a Christian college fair at a Baptist church in Sioux Falls. And Sioux Falls College was there, and Augie and all the, Wheaton, and they had all these representatives. And then there was another table, and it was InterVarsity. And, and because I knew John Howe, who was the staff member, he started talking to me, and I spent almost my whole time talking to John and not talking to any of the reps of these colleges that were trying to recruit students to come to their Christian college. And he's like, I know you. I know you were raised in a Christian family. You even went to a Christian school all the way through from elementary to high school. And you're thinking about being a pastor. If you go straight to a Christian college, when you get out of Christian college and Christian seminary, you will have lived your whole life in a Christian bubble. And he said, you need to go to the university, especially if you're thinking about ministry, because you need to understand how the world works and how people who haven't been raised like you've been raised think. And so it made perfect sense. It's like, yes, and plus it's cheaper. And so, a big advantage. And
it's very true.
So I got involved with InterVarsity because of the influence of my brother and the very persuasive conversation that I had with John Howe, my future staff member.
That's good. That's amazing. As somebody who also went to Christian schools, I went to Christian school all the way through my college years. It wasn't until grad school that I was on a state campus. All of that very much rings true. The bubble and not having a good perspective on how the rest of the world sort of goes through life rhythms and decisions that they make, and it is a really powerful experience to step onto a state campus where you're surrounded by people who just operate differently from you. And that was a strategic move. Like, wow, way to go, InterVarsity staff worker, casting that vision. That's pretty amazing. Now, usually on these in these conversations, I ask people just to share, just share a memory that sort of sums up what your InterVarsity experience was like. But I'd love to. Both of you have brought this up already, and that's Urbana 79 in particular. Is there anything that you recall from your time at Urbana 79 that just really stands out as like, wow, this was a moment or an exchange or something that I got to have during that time that just really that began to spark something new in me?
I think for me, a couple of things were very impactful. One was John Stott expositing from the book of Romans in the morning. And I remember his exposition on Romans 3 and the condition of humanity. And after he taught that morning, he sat the rest of the morning with his face in his hands. He was so overwhelmed by the sense of humanity's lostness. And then for my wife and I, we were dating at the time. We were in the middle of our junior year, and Billy Graham challenged us the evening of December 30th to be willing to go anywhere in the world God would send us. And we responded to that. We had no idea where that would take us. And as we just had the 45th anniversary of that Urbana this last Christmas, it was very meaningful to look back and having been to 40 nations around the world since that commitment, and just to see how God has really honored that commitment and done way more than we would have ever imagined.
That's amazing. Yeah, Roy, how about you? Anything that stands out from Urbana 79?
Yeah, I would echo Mac. I think both of those talks, Billy Graham's talk, John Stott's exposition of Scripture, they were powerful. I think one more thing that I got from Urbana, and I went to two, so I might be blurring things as far as like where the input came from, but Ralph Winter was talking about unreached peoples, and then I started to explore that a little bit more and had an opportunity to talk about where I should go, and it just kind of figured that out. And one of the big things was a pie chart, and a quarter of the pie chart was the Chinese people. So it's just like, boom, right? And the smallest amount of people working to bring the gospel to the largest amount of people.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, then it's just clear. That's where I got to go. And so Fuller Seminary had a Chinese studies department. It was the only seminary in America that had anything that was specialized for people who might want to serve the Chinese or the Chinese diaspora. And so that's what led me there. I think it was really instrumental in just kind of solidifying the call.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I, because I was on staff, I ended up going to 5 Urbanas. And in fact, the first year I came on staff, which would have been the fall of 1981, at our staff conference, one of the reports they shared was that 70% of all the interdenominational missionaries in the U.S. at that time had gotten their start at Urbana.
Wow.
So it was really helped see the kind of the gravity of Urbana and its significance. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love those stories, and we're like, please, as if Urbana comes up, if any of the other things we talk about spark Urbana, and we'll return to it even more directly later on. Bring that up. I love those stories of knowing, like, man, here you go. Here's 1 or 5, 1 or 2 or 5 of these moments that were very important for moving my heart along the way. In the way that God was developing me. Those are amazing stories.
Urbana story, I was asked to come to Urbana in 93 and lead a time of prayer with the group that was there. Okay. And I may be wrong, but I think it may have been the largest, I would call it the largest prayer meeting in the history of the American University.
Wow.
And the fact that it happened at Urbana was very significant. It was a bit of a reflection on what we'd been learning in New York, bringing churches and leaders together to pray on a large scale, and very meaningful to see young people engaging that way.
Yeah. Wow. That would be extremely powerful to be a part of that big of a group, all part of a prayer meeting together. That's amazing. Mac and Roy, as we think about our time on campus, whether it's as a student or as a staff, one of the things that we talk about all the time is this vision of seeing lives transformed, campuses renewed, and world changers developed. This podcast, as should be obvious by our name, we lean into that world changers developed portion. And what does it mean for alumni like you, alumni like us, to be considered world changers, to be a part of God's world changing work? And we define that with 2 parts on this podcast. One, is that you've had a formative experience with InterVarsity, and 2 is that you are continuing to grow in love for God, His Word, His people, and His purposes in the world. And it seems to me very clearly that both of you are engaging in those things in some really cool and unique ways. And you've both founded different movements and organizations. And so I'd love for us just to start moving in that direction and hearing a little more of the story of where did some of these organizations come from that you have founded? What prompted you to do it? And what is the purpose of the organizations that you founded? Tell me about those.
I think the journey in New York, we moved to New York in 1984, and New York was facing, at the time, 3 great challenges. The city was bankrupt. The city had become very violent. We had 8 years of 8 murders a day. There was so much death in New York that the city ran out of room. And the island of Manhattan was very underchurched. We estimate about 9,000 people attending Bible-believing churches on an island of 1.5 million people. So against that backdrop, I was able to work with some staff from Here's Life, which is campus at the time, Campus Crusades, inner city ministry, and we decided to have a prayer gathering of 16 churches on a Friday night. In fact, we were inspired by the work of Rick Richardson, who was on staff at the time in Chicago. Okay. And we invited 16 churches to come pray on a Friday night, and 75 churches showed up. And over the last 35 years, we've had about 2,000 churches that have been active in some form or another in the prayer effort. And then Tim Keller arrived. Tim was very active with InterVarsity at Bucknell. He came to plant Redeemer in the late 80s. And during the 90s, Tim would come to a lot of our events. And then in the year 2000, Tim asked me to co-create with him a church multiplication alliance, which we did. By the year 2003, we had about 10 denominations working together. And then we commissioned the research in 2009. And we saw that evangelicalism had grown 300% in 20 years. Wow. And we took that research and we created a gathering called Movement Day, which really has a vision to bring faith leaders from the marketplace, from church, from the NGO, into a common space on the same day to really ask 3 questions. What are the greatest challenges facing the city? What would we like to be true in 10 years? And what can we do together practically this next year? So we've been doing that for the last 15 years. We've interacted with leaders from 900 cities around the world. Wow. We've had about 60,000 leaders involved. And it's also been tied into Lausanne. I've represented Cities for Lausanne for 11 years. And so a lot of that was an outgrowth of the influence of InterVarsity, particularly around the spiritual disciplines, Bible study, prayer. We've learned the conviction that the width of our influence spiritually is in proportion to the depth of our intimacy with God. And that has really stayed with us over all these years. And then I also think taking context seriously. InterVarsity has always taught us to love our campus and to figure out how to strategically impact our campus. So those are all things that have informed our work here in New York and now around the world.
Wow. That's that's some amazing work and multiplication that's gone on. Some pretty cool other InterVarsity alumni like Tim Keller that you've gotten to work with in the past. That's pretty amazing. Roy, can you tell us about some of the work that you've been doing?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just pick up where Matt kind of left off about how InterVarsity talks to us about loving our campus, and it was that DNA that really helped me form the ministry that I started. And so that plus some years of doing youth ministry. So we were starting a ministry in Mountain View, and we had limited resources, limited people. We're thinking about how can we impact this city that impacts the world? Because as I already mentioned, there are some small companies you've heard of. Mountain View is headquarters of Google, Intuit, LinkedIn, Symantec. And so it's like, wow, I looked at those with the eyes of an InterVarsity guy and thought of them as campuses, not as companies. And so I thought, well, what would it be like if we could just touch some of these campuses and have an influence and an opportunity to bring the goodness of Jesus into those campuses and encourage the believers that are working on those campuses. And that epiphany moment came to me actually in a really kind of strange way. I was, as I was preparing, ramping up to do this ministry, I was no longer preaching every Sunday in other churches. And it was that kind of fallow ground of preparing to launch. And my brother was invited to fill in for somebody who was going to teach for a week in Ukraine. And my brother is also InterVarsity alum as well, as I said. And
nice.
So he couldn't go, and he says, "Hey, I know somebody else that might be able to go. And I got in touch with the pastor that was going to go, and said I was willing to take his place. So I was a substitute teacher for a substitute teacher. You know, I'm like third tier.
Nice.
And, you know, but they still took me, and they sent me out there, and I opened up my Chromebook, which at the time was my laptop, right? And, you know, the thing about a Chromebook is you can't store anything on it. Everything has to be stored on the cloud. And so I sign into the church internet, and I see Google in its multicolored font. And then underneath in black lettering, I see the word Ukraine. And I just had this aha moment. And I thought, wow, that means they have localization here. They're managing search specifically for Ukraine. This is 2013. And so, very early in the development of the nation, still a lot of influence from Russia. And so search was being managed in accordance with whatever kind of agreements had to be made between Google and the nation. And I thought, if we could just reach the believers in Mountain View, they could, through the conduit of the company, encourage their brothers and sisters here in Kyiv. And like, wouldn't that be cool? And so I just came back from that trip, and I said, we have to do this. This has to be a very crucial part of our mission. And so I started asking all the pastors that I knew, hey, do you have anybody in your company that works in your church that works at Google? And I got introduced to one guy. I had a guest speak at his church, and he was playing guitar. Another guy, when I was guest speaking at his church, was playing keyboards. And I don't know what it is about Googlers. They're like multi-talented, right? They can code, they can do all this amazing stuff. They're musicians. And so I started meeting them all individually and started asking them all the same question. What's the spiritual climate at work? Because you guys know what the spiritual climate was like at your university. It's not always positive. And so I wanted to get the temperature, the spiritual climate in the workplace. And some people felt like it was pretty good. They could say, oh, I went to this retreat, and I come back and they're supercharged and they're excited about it. And they'll tell their friends at work, and their friends will actually kind of lean in and, you know, tell me more. And then other people, when you tell them something like that, or they find out that you go to church, it's like, whoa, you're one of those, you know, and it's like you're back in junior high, and you can no longer sit at the cool kids table, right? You've been ostracized for being a Christian, being a believer. And so I just asked them, how can I help? And they invited me to come in and pray with them. And it's interesting that both of our stories also have this really strong, deep connection to prayer. And I think that's also InterVarsity influence. Not maybe an Urbana influence per se, although it may have been a point of contact, but we had David Bryant come out and talk to us about concerts of prayer. And then also the China thing. And we had David Adeney come and speak at one of our fall conferences. And that kind of broke my heart for China. I started to pray for China. He had this newsletter called Pray for China, and it would have a daily prayer request for China or for the Chinese diaspora. And I was praying over that newsletter month after month, day after day for like 3 years. And it's like God just started to carve a space in my heart for that part of the world. And then Ralph Winters said, hey, look at this. And it's like, okay, yeah. And then we also had Becky Pippert come and talk about and her book, you know, Out of the Salt Shaker into the World.
Yes.
So really foundational things. And it was just all of that coming together. Another thing that really impacted our work is once I started to meet these Googlers, and Google Christian Fellowship had already started in 2008. And so I'm just coming along some people who have dropped in and out of a Bible study that they hosted in one of their campuses. And I started asking them, well, what else do you have? And they said, well, there was a book club. It's not happening anymore. That guy that runs a Bible study is trying to go to a couple other campuses and run the Bible study, but they had multiple campuses and across Mountain View and Sunnyvale. I think they had 60,000 employees, and it's being serviced by 2 or 3 Bible studies and occasionally a book club. And it's like, we can do better. When we were students, we would pull out a map of the university and we would look at the map and we'd say, we have InterVarsity students in this dorm and in this dorm and in this dorm, but these 3 dorm complexes don't have any IV students in. And then we asked each other, who wants to move? And we literally made transfer requests. I moved out of the best, newest dorm at the university into the worst dorm in the university, on mission, on purpose. And it was great that I did, because I was able to start what we called then, I think, the investigative Bible study. And then later on you called gigs, and then whatever it is called now, I don't know. But I started a Bible study, and a freshman who was assigned to that dorm started to come, and he got connected to Christ. And, that wouldn't have happened without that kind of intentionality of like, we want to make sure that we're present on every campus. And so I started to share that vision with the Googlers, and they started multiplying groups. And then I got invited by one of the guys who had a brother at Apple to come to Apple. And Apple already had 6 or 8 Bible studies multiplied across their campuses. Apple Christian Fellowship had started, I think, in 2001. But then one guy was at a campus where they didn't have a group. And he says, hey, will you help me start a group? I said, sure. I mean, and I really do nothing. I really do nothing. I just like encourage them. It's all employee led. It's just like InterVarsity, right? Staff members, you don't do it. You give it to the students. You empower the students. You encourage the students, and they do everything. And it's just watching this happen, like groups at Google get started, groups at Apple. Then a woman said, hey, my neighbor works at Cisco. They don't have a group. Will you help her? And it's like, yeah. And so we get a group at Cisco. One of the guys in our original core team gets a job at Facebook, and he says, hey, I'll badge you into Facebook so we can meet the Christians there and encourage the believers there. And it was just all a very natural, organic, relational spread of the gospel into workplaces. And so our mission is to positively impact companies that impact the world. And like Mac has said, it's been more than you can ask or imagine. The answers to prayer have been incredible.
Wow. That's these are phenomenal stories. And as I'm listening to both of you share, the word that keeps coming up to my mind is like context or contextualized. And it seems to me that both of you have had these experiences of working alongside people who you say, you know your city, you know the needs of your city, or you know the needs of your workplace, the people that are there, you know the climate of like, so let me help you develop ministry, or let's work together on ministry that is contextualized to that space, to those people, to that city, to that company. Can you speak just a little bit more? Mac, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on like, what has your experience been like with context and sort of helping people sort through how do I bring this to the level of the people that I'm working with, and it's not just a one size fits all experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I was really fortunate to experience from 1998 to 2000, I did some doctoral work with Ray Bakke. Ray was asked by Billy Graham in 1974 to go study the cities of the world. And Ray traveled to 250 cities of 1 million or more. His book, Theology as Big as the City, was published by InterVarsity Press. He's spoken at Urbana. And that experience informed something that we started 5 years ago called the Movement Day Scholars Program. And we've had about 1,500 leaders come through it so far. It's a kind of a 3-level training. And one of the arenas that we help leaders master is, what does it mean to become a subject matter expert on your city?
Yeah, wow.
And we feel like that's really critical, that we believe that people can only love that which they know. And our vision really is to get the smartest people in a city with the biggest hearts in the same room to design the future. We're working with a city in southern India called Chennai, where Thomas the Apostle came and was martyred. And they have a 10-year plan to start 4,000 new churches. But they really know their city. They know where there are churches, where there are not churches. They say that we're a city of 6,000 churches and 2,000 slums. And we really want to plant churches where there need to be churches. And the work in India, because they've really adopted this contextual model, in 5 years, they've grown from 4 cities being engaged to 125 cities being engaged.
Wow.
And we're beginning to see that happen. Last week, we were in Dubai. We had Movement Day Middle East, and we had 1,000 leaders from 100 cities, about 40 nations in the room. And we're seeing work beginning to pioneer in parts of the Middle East, places like Syria and Lebanon and Jordan and Iraq, and really taking these same principles. One of the writing projects that I did last year with a Chinese colleague is we wrote a book called Why Asian Cities. And we really framed out the challenge of Asia across all 5 regions and what the greatest needs are, what are some of the best practices. And one of our convictions is that as we get older chronologically, but also as we mature spiritually, that we're really responsible for what we know. And as Roy was sharing earlier about the challenge of China, we really want the global church to engage the parts of the world where there are the greatest needs. In Asia, which is about 60% of the global population, there are 1.1 billion people outside of Christianity, more than the combined population of the other 5 continents. And because that's true, we feel like the whole church, especially the church in the West, really needs to lean into that reality and become part of these strategic conversations. And the beauty of technology and other resources is that we can really meaningfully engage as the global church. And those of us that have Urbana as part of our resume, it's really an opportunity to continue to engage in really meaningful, substantive, and historic efforts. We pioneered what we call a Singapore 500 Asia City Forum, where we gather leaders around the world to look at these efforts. And we'll have Roy joining us in Singapore in September and talking about what's happening in the marketplace. And we really believe that you have to aggregate to accelerate. So that's a bit of what guides are thinking. Yeah.
Wow. Man, these are such great stories. And one of the things that I love, Roy, you mentioned this before, it does feel like it has such InterVarsity DNA to it that Mac, you're talking about empowering people who have the biggest hearts and who have the most information about their particular context. And Roy, you're talking about people that just you know your context well at work, and that neither of you have to be the expert. That it can even feel to the extent, Roy, like you're saying, that I don't do anything. All I do is sort of pat people on the back and say you can do it. But that's so exciting to me that you are not the one who holds all of this together. I mean, neither are the people that you're sending. It is the Lord that holds these things together, and He's the one doing this work, and we just get to be a part of it with Him. He'd do it with or without us. But that you all get to play this special role in empowering the right people to go to the right places and say, you're the expert, do the thing. Like, you can do this, and God is already there waiting for you. And He's already working. Just go take your expertise and your heart for this city or for this place of work, this company, and go do this thing. And I'm excited to keep encouraging you to do that. I really love those stories. And speaking of stories, can we just sink down into the weeds for just a moment? And I wonder, do both of you have maybe just one story that you could share that you say wow, this is a place where God was just showing off in my context and just showing up in really amazing ways, and this attests to the things that He's doing in this space.
Your turn, Roy.
Well, it's not fair to just ask for one story because there's so
I know
many.
It's not.
There are so many stories from these workplaces, and like you said, I soon realized that I was not the expert, and I was I was just the convener and the connector. It's like I'm now being invited to go to Google and to Apple and to Facebook, as it was still called, to Cisco, to LinkedIn. And I realized I'm starting to meet all these communities of Christians, and they don't know each other. Just like previously, I'd met all these individual Googlers who didn't know each other. Now I'm meeting communities of Christians that don't know each other. And I thought, this has to change. I have to bring these people together because they are the experts. And once they start to cross-pollinate, once they start to share their best practices with one another, it just becomes exponential. And what one group does gets cut and pasted and replicated in another company. And so like a really great discipleship mentoring program that Accenture starts gets utilized in Google and in another company. Somebody else says, you know what, we did this worship night. And then, so Google hosts a worship night, and then they start to host worship nights in another company. They went and did crazy things, like super crazy things that you would not even think possible. I remember having a conversation outside of Google at after a guest speaker had come in, and he had this idea, and he's kind of one of these guys who goes off these like little Holy Spirit nudges, and he said, I just see this picture, like the Holy Spirit just beaming down on this company, and wouldn't it be great if we just opened the portal for 24 hours to just let the Holy Spirit just come into this place and just have 24 hours of worship? And the Googler sitting next to me is like, I don't think we could do this. I don't think we could get permission to have 24 hours of worship, but maybe we could do 12. And so she went and got permission to have 12 hours of continuous praise and worship at their company.
Wow.
And they did this twice. And then they did it the third time at Facebook. And it's like, we started to call these leaders the group of super friends, you know, and it's like, and they realized I did nothing. So they dubbed me the Nick Fury, you know, because he does nothing, right? All the Avengers go do all the cool stuff.
That's right.
and so it was just like,
oh man,
there's so many stories of just faithfulness, boldness, really wanting to faithfully represent Jesus. And then crazy stories of answered prayer. Like supernatural productivity, God giving somebody an insight into a bug that they're trying to fix as an engineer and saving the company millions of dollars because they prayed for a solution and the solution came to them after like 2 months of work, and then 2 hours after prayer, boom, here it is. And it's like it was delivered to them. It's just incredible what God can do when we open up ourselves to Him. And so if there are any listeners who are working at a company where you could be the one who launches this kind of community, we would love to see that happen. And if you're not working at a company that could have potential to launch a group, maybe it's time to switch dorms. Maybe, you know, you can go there and be the pioneer.
Wow.
That's great.
That's so great.
You know, we just were in Dubai this last week, and I'm thinking about how God choreographs our lives into historic moments. About 60 years ago, in the part of the world where the UAE is now, the infant mortality rate was 50%.
Wow.
And God raised up 2 medical missionaries that were invited in by the royal family, and they built the first hospital there in the desert called the Oasis Hospital, and they lowered the infant mortality from 50% to 0.5%.
Wow.
And because of their work, the population stabilized and became the United Arab Emirates. I think it was 1973. And the royal family called the work of this couple the birth of a nation. Wow. And because the royal family feels so indebted to the church, they allow the city of Dubai in an Islamic country to have 400 churches. Along comes a church plant, a house church, 20 years ago called Fellowship of the Emirates. It started with 30 people. 10 years, it grew to 3,000. And I met the pastor of that church 10 years ago, and they invited us in as movement day. And we had our, I think, about our 5th movement day in Dubai last week. We had 1,000 leaders, 100 cities, 40 countries. Dubai's really become the center of the earth. But we had 13 nations from the Middle East. in this gathering.
Wow.
And as a result of being together last week, all these countries, places like Egypt and Iraq and Jordan and Israel, are going to all create their own expressions of this work. But we wouldn't have been there if it had not been for this missionary couple 60 years ago. And so we're all living in this moment of time and able to bring our passion and our expertise. A lot of what we did last week was an extension of things that I learned with InterVarsity. And so those of us that are alumni really have been given tremendous spiritual history gifts that God can use really anywhere. When we had our first movement day in Chennai in 2017, I told that audience of about 1,000 leaders, I said, if a first century Jew can plant the gospel in South Asia, a 21st South Asian can plant the gospel anywhere. And that's really the world where we're living. And God's choreographing so many opportunities around the world. And there's a sense that God is far more passionate and has a much greater sense of urgency than we ever will for people that are outside of the gospel. And it's really an opportunity for us to really assess what we're doing and to live consequentially and to make choices that matter.
This is so great, and what you're sharing there, Mac, makes me think that like you don't always know. You almost never know the long-term impact that the work that we're doing right now has. Like there could be just an element of faithfulness that the Lord is inviting us into. Say, just do this thing here in this place right now. You're not going to see the full extent of what it does, but I know what it will do. And will you be faithful now so that decades or centuries from now, there's going to be this growth and these possibilities that I'm opening up because of your faithfulness here in this place. And some of those moments might feel really big, like changing the infant mortality rate. And some of it might feel really small, like just inviting your coworker to have a Bible study with you. Right. And like that those kinds of things can lead to these huge moments of revival in a company or in a country or whatever it might be, and opening doors like this. As you guys think through these stories, as you've been sharing already, you've named a couple of these, but I wonder, is there either one that you haven't mentioned or one that you would go back and highlight and say, this is sort of a thread that I can trace from my time with InterVarsity or at Urbana in particular, that really has fed into the way that I'm engaging with the Lord in my calling today?
I think back to even my experience with Bible and life, and just again the importance of spiritual disciplines. When I was on a summer missions project with InterVarsity in 1983 in North India, I heard the story of, and I don't even really fully understand the context of it, but it was about a leader who began to read the Bible every 90 days. And wow. I took that model, and the next year we moved to New York, and I did that, and I thought, that was a good experience. And then 15 years ago, I just was prompted to pick up that discipline. And it was the same year that we began Movement Day here in New York. And I look back over 15 years, and it's a real mystery, but I have this sense that as we give ourselves and are committed to the revelation of God in Scripture, that He really informs our thinking, our decision-making, our strategy. And I do see a parallel between that spiritual discipline and our organization having its fingerprints on 900 cities. And I just feel like God's just committed to revealing Himself, and that was really rooted in some of those Bible study disciplines in InterVarsity. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, Roy, how about you?
Yeah, I think that there's so many things. In fact, one of the reasons why when you asked me to be on this podcast, I said, so let's get Mac on this podcast too, because we both came from Nazareth. I mean, like, this is like, can anything good come out of Nazareth? It's like, we're from South Dakota, for heaven's sake. It's like, how did this happen? That one university has produced two global ministries on opposite coasts. Somebody was praying, somebody was sowing into that university, and so it's like the students that were before us, the staff that brought the DNA of, mission, prayer, evangelism, all of this, and made it part of our DNA, really are a big part of our story. And, it was years later that we reconnected because as I said, we were on opposite coasts. And as we started to see, the landscape of what God was doing, I was like, oh, Mac, I know Mac, and so we got reconnected. And so we've had fun kind of getting reconnected and actually collaborating again. And all of that has been just a testimony to God's faithfulness. And, but yeah, I think there were certainly certain things I would call out again: the concerts of prayer, the heart for missions, the fall conferences, Becky Pippert talking about, her experience as a student in Spain. And I can remember one thing that she said, people were talking to her and she was really apologetic about a situation where she was with her non-Christian roommates and she had totally messed up, been very human and sinned in ways that were, not God honoring. And she just said, I'm really sorry. I mean, and her roommate said something to this effect, like, Becky, we know you're not perfect, but in fact, it's because you're not perfect that we're actually able to listen to you and to have these conversations with you. And that's what her imperfections made Jesus shine all the brighter. And so I think it's really important for us to kind of take the pressure off of ourselves, realize it's not all about us, and just get out of the way and let God move and empower others. Don't think it has to be us who holds, the torch all the time. Hand that torch to somebody else and just empower others so that the movement of God does not get impeded by us. And it's too often that we become the bottleneck or the stop measure that really prevents the flow of what God wants to do. And I think InterVarsity creates that sense of camaraderie, empowerment, and that's great DNA to have, so very thankful.
I was thinking about the last two Lausanne Congresses, 2010 and just recently last year in Incheon. And a lot of the Lausanne Congress experience is really shaped by InterVarsity leaders. So a lot of that DNA has really carried over into these other regions. And as Roy was sharing, it's a little bit of a independent thought, but I'm really thankful for some of the leaders in our InterVarsity groups that really brought kind of the generational faithfulness from their family into the campus. I mean, really, to have someone like Roy, who was so spiritually mature as a freshman, step into, and the University of South Dakota is very secular. It was named as the number 2 party school in the country by some publications. And I was in a fraternity, and there was a lot of, there were some pretty interesting lifestyles on campus, and so to really struggle with what does it mean to follow God in the midst of that was really an important contribution from InterVarsity.
Yeah, wow. As you think about your fellow alumni like you who are listening in or watching this conversation, is there like a brief word of encouragement that you would give to other alumni like you as they also think about what it looks like to engage their calling with Jesus and to step into God's world-changing work in their context?
Roy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would say is God has you where he wants you. He has called you to that place, and he can use you there, and that wherever you are working for the Lord and not for men. So many times we think, and I thought this too, that if you want to work for the Lord, you become an InterVarsity staff member, or you become a missionary. And if you don't have the courage to become a missionary, you become a pastor. And so those are the 3 jobs that are working for the Lord. And then maybe a nurse because it's service oriented, or a teacher, something where you're serving people, but bankers like Mac, heavens no, there's no way that they work for God, and it's just like, I was so wrong. And the scriptures are very clear when Paul in Ephesians and Colossians talks to workers who had the lowest job on the planet. He says, it is the Lord Christ that you are serving. Wow. And once we get that right, once we realize that God placed us where we are so that we can serve him there, the possibilities become endless. And so I would encourage you to shine right where you are and to let Jesus manifest himself through you to the people around you so that you would just faithfully represent Jesus to the best of your imperfect ability and just be who God wants you to be right there. And the opportunities are endless. So we are currently connected to Christian fellowships in about 160 companies. And that's by connected, I mean, we've had these kinds of conversations with leaders or in-person visits to their fellowships. Virtually, we're connected to more than 500 in 38 countries, et cetera. But like more intimately connected to this 160. Our missional goal is to see believers coming together in community in all of the Forbes Global 2000 companies. Mm-hmm. So that means we're only 1,840 away from our goal. And so, if you're progress in one of those companies, then connect, please. We would love to, we would like to move the needle to 161 or 162 and see God start to do this. I really believe God wants this to happen more than we do. And so I'm very confident that this is going to happen. And that means, we're going to go to some really interesting companies. If you look at the Forbes Global 2000 list, it's going to be fun.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah. As you shared that question, John, I think for me, just we all have a recognition that we've got one life and that God wants us to live as consequentially as we can. And I think we're all responsible as part of our discipleship really is to grow our vision. Part of that is learning what God is doing in the world. And part of that is understanding the unique gifts that God has given each of us. And really a big believer in the kind of the promise of Ephesians 2:10 that God has been preparing good works for us since before the foundation of the earth. Part of it is discovering whatever that is. Roy was talking about their vision for 2,000 companies. Our vision is to impact 1,000 cities. There are 4,000 cities of 100,000 or more around the world, and we'd love to have some influence on 1,000 of them. And we're excited that God can use anybody in any city and connecting together with the larger ecosystem to really make a big difference. And so that's really the hope and the opportunity.
Yeah. Wow. I love those words of encouragement and those are things that no matter where God is inviting you to invest yourself, you can take that to your context. Once again, very contextualized. The people who are listening, they're the experts in the space that God has placed them. And what does it look like to take yourself fully into that space that God desires this even more than we ever could. And so he is ready to engage in this space with you. Which doesn't mean it's going to be easy just because you're both on board. It may be the most difficult invitation that you say yes to, potentially, but that God is absolutely going to walk through those things with us in the places where he's put us on purpose. And it's just such an encouragement to know that is reality. And I want to thank both of you so much for joining us. I'm hopeful that you'll provide me with two things. We won't do it right now just for the sake of time. I want to let you guys keep going, but two things that I would love from you that I can put into the show notes. One, what are the ways that your fellow alumni can be praying for you? I'd like to put a couple of those requests from you in there. And then two, ways that you've given several invitations here. Are there ways that alumni can engage with you a little more directly? Or with your organization, so that if they hear you sharing these things and they're like, I want to be a part of that, that they can take next steps in doing that. So if you can give me some links or email addresses or things that I can drop in the show notes, that would be really helpful, along with ways that we can be partnering in prayer with you. I would love that very much. And I just want to say thank you again to both of you for taking some time to share these stories. These are the kind of things that Now we're here at the end of this conversation. I just want to go for another 2 hours hearing these stories, because this gets me so excited thinking about, man, God is so good that he's using little old us from these flyover states, as we're oftentimes termed, of South Dakota and Minnesota and around the nation, around the world, and saying, I want you to be a part of this with me. and that he invites us to get to step into these really cool spaces that it feels like a huge honor. And I get so excited hearing the ways that God is doing that with our alumni. So thank you to both of you for your faithfulness in saying yes to Jesus, and for following him into this work. It's a huge honor to me to get to sit and chat with alumni like you during these conversations.
Great. Thanks, John. Great opportunity.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in, alumni. If you know someone who would enjoy the InterVarsity World Changers podcast, please be sure to share the episode with them. You can also support the podcast by leaving a rating and a review, or by visiting our donation page in the show notes. InterVarsity World Changers is brought to you by the InterVarsity Alumni Relations Team, hosted and produced by John Steele, production assistance by Mike Centera, and edited by Caleb Leppert. Our theme song is Crazy by InterVarsity alumnus Andy Mineo. Go change that world, alumni.